those industrials. We're going to end the week on a strong note here. Now, of the 400-point run-up in the Dow, a huge chunk of that, I don't know the exact percentages, our Charlie Brady, our stock senator, does, but I believe earlier it was accounting for about 100 points of the Dow's advance. But suffice it to say, just news that Boeing is going to resume jetliner production sometime next week. Well, that's all the market had to hear, because whatever you think of Boeing, all that, a company of that size and all of its difficulties, now saying it's going to resume trying to make planes again, well, that was greeted favorably. That, and of course, the promising news on the drug front with a potential treatment, vaccine, symptom addresser, if you will, out of Gilead Sciences. Hard to tell because the company isn't saying anything, but the stock was running up. Now, that's not par to the Dow, what have you, but it is lifting biotech, some related medical issues here. One other thing I did want to stress as I look at the Dow now, just shy of 24,000, keep in mind at its lows, it had gotten down to around 18,000. Now, at its highs, it was touching in mid-February or so, close to 30,000. So we have essentially retraced about half, a little bit more of the ground that we lost. And in some issues, it's not quite as dramatic today. Issues like Amazon and Netflix, which were hitting day after day all-time highs. So it's a reminder that the market is trying to find its footing, much of it buoyed by, again, optimism that maybe there are some promising signs on the treatment of the virus or addressing the virus itself. Way too early to tell. But I did want you to peek at something else we're watching here, because oil is a separate development. You might like it if it means cheaper gas and all of that. But the fact of the matter is this accord that we have with OPEC does not seem to be wowing folks. And it's hard to understand what OPEC has agreed to, or Saudi Arabia or outside countries like Russia have agreed to. I think it was as high as 20 million barrels a day they're going to take off the market. But that is being weighed against the slowdown of economic activity, including a 6.8% reversal of GDP in China. First time we've seen that in 40 years. So they're weighing that with the cut in production, saying, maybe even 20 million barrels a day ain't going to cut it. So we are multi-year lows once again on oil. So you have these rival battle plans here. Now back to where we stand right now with talk that the president wants to get things reopened soon. He has a 3-phase deal he's working on in concert with the nation's governors. That first phase is of great interest to my next guest because it will involve slowly reopening restaurants, but with a caveat here. They're not going to be as crowded. They might have half the capacity, and that might be by state and or federal edict. Paul Nangiavelli is here at the legendary Restaurant Brands chairman and CEO. You know his restaurants, Bennigan's and Steak and Ale, delicious. I think a few years ago, when you and your wife bought out these stores, you probably never would have envisioned what's going on now. How are you going to deal with this once you're allowed, business can come back, but not as many in your restaurants?
Well, always great to be with you, my Italian friend. And let me tell you, the world and especially the restaurant industry got sucker punched. And when you get sucker punched, it's good to get up and be a street fighter and then learn how to adapt to your enemy. So right now, what we're doing is, what everybody else is doing in the retailing. You're learning how to create. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. So we're learning to our grocery store. We have adult beverages that we deliver. We have delivery. We have pickup. Wherever we have the ability to operate our business is what we're doing. But the fact of the matter is we still have to lay people off. We're still at a huge constraint in terms of full restaurant operation. But the president is doing a phenomenal job of trying to release this pent-up demand that exists for all of us in order to get the machinery of the restaurant industry that helps drive this economy back to where it was. Now, I disagree with your previous guest from Minnesota that I do think it's going to be a V-shaped type of recovery. However, we have already exhausted the first stimulus that the president put out. The monies are gone. So I really think that let him eat cake. Pelosi needs to get back to Washington, and we need to pass the next phase of relief so that, we know that the pandemic kills people, and so does poverty. We got to get people back into the businesses. We got to put them back to work. And we need to do that again through a common sense. Of course, common sense isn't so common anymore. Staggered roll up so that we communicate to our guests, which have always trusted us, that they can have confidence that we're going to operate in a safe, clean environment. And we already have very good procedures in place. We've never had issues like what's occurring right now in terms of the pandemic. But we have already taken steps to take a look at what is the new paradigm in restaurant operations in terms of size of restaurant, even for new builds coming online, and the social distancing and the wearing of gloves and disposable menus. These are the kinds of things that we're fighting for right now, planning for right now, so that we can give these our guests the beautiful Monte Cristos that they are jonesing for, deliriously so. And we're going to get to the other side of this, Neil.
All right. Well, by the way, the Monte Cristo sandwiches, they're a work of art. So I hope you can just rev those things up. But, Paul, I do want to ask you how you reconfigure your restaurants for this. Now, let's say restaurants still have to honor the distancing provisions. Maybe they're not 6 feet. Maybe they're 5 or 4 feet. I don't even know. But your restaurants are popular public venues. If you had to take out half the seats or tell people fill up half the booths, well, it's welcome, I'm sure, to have them back in.
Exactly.
It's still going to be a problem for you just on the capacity side, won't it?
Right, but on the other side of that, Neil, we're making great strides on the testing piece, and we're making great strides on the vaccine. So it's a period of time that we have to get through. But again, the overarching goal is to make sure that our guests, and every guest for that matter, but our guests particularly for Bennigan's and Steak and Ale, have the confidence in us that they can come and have what we've always said they can get with us, is a legendary restaurant experience. And we want to guarantee that by practicing.
So what you're saying, I just want to be clear, you don't think that but you don't think that the limitations on crowds will last very long. In other words, it sounds like you're hoping that, you get in the restaurant, they're fine, they enjoy themselves, and eventually it will be back to the way it was?
Eventually it will come back to the way it was, but in the interim here, again, we have to pay. Look, we don't want to see another spike of this disease, so we're going to pay particular attention to all the safety and guidance that's already been provided us. And the fact that we can even let people back in our restaurants is huge good news to all of us. But again, we need to continue looking at the unit economics and how we're going to put people in there so they feel safe, have the distance, be able to deliver the food. So the things that we're doing is, even looking at, what is the restaurant look in the future for casual dining? It's going to be smaller. It's going to be limited seats. We certainly have learned a lot about delivery and carry out and other avenues to create revenue for our restaurants. And of course, we're adapting to those as well. And, again, we're looking forward to the time, and hopefully it's not in the far distant future, where we can operate as we did, and not have this fear, which, by the way, is a great motivator for all of us to fix everything, paralyze us.
Okay. Paul, thank you very, very much. Best of luck when you reopen and your stores and your people. Paul Mangianelli. All right, we have a lot more coming up. Paul touched on it here, but this waiting for added stimulus. He was actually addressing the so-called Paycheck Protection Program extension. The thing that was such a hit that they ran out of money. They topped out, the wells run dry, and they want another $250 billion for it. But the devil is in the details and getting everyone back to agree on providing that. Right now, it looks like a long shot, even now, after this.
It's vital we do this. It's vital we help small business. But if we don't deal with the testing and healthcare problems, if we don't deal with the local government problems, small business may have enough money to get back, although we got to fix that program. But people won't go out on the streets.
Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are now accusing the Democrats of playing games with the American people.
I tried to pass a clean funding bill. Senate Democrats blocked it. So here's where we are. A week later, with absolutely no progress.
Brett, you're up to the minute on this reporting. How much pressure is there on lawmakers?
Intensified, and Democrats realize that this is really not a political place they want to be. And negotiations after that pressure intensified have been more successful. The breaking news is that they believe that they have an agreement in principle, big picture, on another funding mechanism. Now, this is short of a phase 4 big coronavirus bill. This is to replenish the PPE with $250 billion, to do some of the other funding that Chuck Schumer talked about for hospitals specifically, local governments. There's another SBA program, Melissa, that is not talked about, and that is there was $7 billion originally put aside for small businesses to apply for $10,000. Well, 5 million small businesses applied for that. They only had $7 billion. You do the math. I mean, it's $500 million. I mean, it's $1 billion. So there are a couple of programs that they believe that they can get through the details over the weekend, and then Monday or Tuesday have a unanimous consent to replenish these programs as kind of a stopgap.
Yeah. Harris, I mean, I talk to small business owners every day. Just this morning, talking to someone who was right there in line to get the money, you know, and had been in the process, had been in the queue, and was told that they were about to get the funding before it ran dry. Can you imagine the disappointment, you know, of having told your employees that you were gonna bring them back, that you had the money?
Yeah, I think we can all imagine that, because somebody close to some of us must be working for or own small businesses. They make up 2/3 of the hiring in the United States. So, I mean, obviously we can't imagine. We can look outside our own doors. Lara was mentioning, you know, it's almost ghost town, even in the areas that have not been hit as hard yet by COVID-19. But, you know, here on the East Coast, Melissa, we can look out. Fifth Avenue is a ghost town. I mean, there are places where you just don't see people, and you know how it works. Yes, you may see some named stores, but particularly here where you have a crush of people, you have so many of those small businesses, mom and pop type restaurant businesses, but also supplying things like chargers for your phone, you know, the kind of catch-all stores that pop up in New York and stay for years because they're in the right place where people always need those things by the millions. And New York never sleeps, that sort of thing. Just to use that as an example, but as you fan out across the United States, you know, now you're interrupting not just people's dreams and aspirations and innovations, but supply chains. I mean, small businesses also supply us with some things. So it is not something we want to imagine, but that reality is definitely there. You know, I wanted to follow up with a question for Brett. As they talk about whatever this next phase is going to be, and I know they're careful not to call it phase 4 or whatever, but the ball keeps moving. I mean, there are places that keep extending their lockdowns, which puts more and more pressure on these businesses. How can they guess what the magic numbers are going to be?
They can't. This is a rolling thing. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Forget, there's no talk about concern about the deficit or debt. These numbers keep coming in. They keep getting increased. Right. So you don't have concerns from anybody on Capitol Hill about those numbers. The emergency aspect of this is moving the ball. The question is, you know, negotiating for these things. One of the concerns was this original unemployment funding that gave more money. So there are some portion of the 22 million who filed for unemployment who are actually making more on unemployment than they're making at their jobs. And that's a concern that they have to deal with long term. But right now, all of that is not factoring into the decision making on what those numbers look like.
And I would say, just
Dr. Saphier,
what's so interesting is when you're talking to business leaders versus politicians, they are very concerned about how much money is being put aside, because what they say is, we're still going to pay for that, whether you pay for it now or you pay for it long term, or whether, you know, the generations will pay for this. Because whenever you put money aside, somebody still has to pay for it. It doesn't come out of a magic pot. And that is part of the concern about what happens down the line economically.
Absolutely. Well, a huge week for 2020 Democrat Joe Biden as he racks up not one, not two, but 3 major endorsements showing how much stronger his position is than Hillary Clinton's was in 2016. But is it strong enough? We're going to debate that next.
Always been the governor's power. And then he says, there's a 50-piece puzzle. Oh, no. That's called a map of the United States. It's not a puzzle. And those lines are called states, and those states have constitutional power. Remember the way this whole thing starts, the colonies create the federal government, not the other way around. So, introduction to constitutional theory and policy. The states have the power to open. The states are opening on their own timelines. We're trying to coordinate with our neighboring states. Western states are coordinating. Middle states are coordinating. All he's doing is walking in front of the parade, but he has nothing to do with the timing of the parade, right? The governors are going to open when they think they should open. All I'm saying is there's two things they need help from. They need help from the federal government. Two things. Help on testing, because states can't do that. And I don't want to redo the mayhem of the PPE debacle. Second point, we need funding to do it. And the way you love talking about how you funded everything, big businesses are all getting bailed out. Airlines are getting bailed out. Bail out, bail out, bail out, all with taxpayers' money. State governments, which are the only ones who are doing this whole reopening, they're going to need funding, right? And will show gratitude. How many times do you want me to say thank you? But I'm saying thank you for doing your job. This was your role as president, okay? So that's the honest statement of fact. Without politics, I'm not running for anything. I have no agenda but delivering to the people of this state, and without ego. You want me to say thank you? Thank you for doing your job in helping build Javits and sending the U.S. Navy ship Comfort. Thank you for participating in a modicum of federal responsibility in a national crisis, which you know is a national crisis because he declared a federal emergency. So thank you for having the federal government participate in a federal emergency. And thank you for help building Javits, 2,500 beds, pursuant to your projection. Your projection. And if you don't agree with your projection, fire the head of the CDC, fire the White House coronavirus task force people, because they did the projections. In case he forgot or didn't read his CDC report, just to be precise, March 13th, so we're well into it, CDC says 160 to 214 million Americans infected. That's over half the population. CDC. 2.4 million to 21 million Americans hospitalized. 2.4 million, bottom number, 21 million Americans hospitalized. March 13th, the CDC. 2.4, okay? Let's say they're a low number, 2.4 to 21, which is a hell of a differential, right? Either 2.4 or 10 times 2.4. Thank you for that great projection. But anyway, let's take that minimum number, 2.4. How many hospital beds do you have? 900. Call it 1 million. So it's 2.5 times what your capacity is, right? We're the state of New York. We have a 50,000 bed capacity. By their projections, what do we need? 150,000 beds. By the way, what did McKinsey say that we needed? 140,000 beds. They got it from the CDC. As it says on the screen. They got it from the CDC. That's why we built 2,500 beds at Javits. Because we listened to you, Mr. President. And if we were foolish for listening to you, then shame on us. But read your own report next time before you criticize it.
Why not state spending? You mentioned at some point someone's going to come knocking. Does that mean at some point the state might have to cut off state spending, and what would that even look like?
Rob?
So right now we're looking at our cash numbers, our priorities, right, of making payrolls, making sure we're funding Medicaid, making sure we're funding.
All right, a little bit of a testy response on the part of the New York governor. He's updating New Yorkers on the status and the course of the virus in New York State, but responding to a jab, a Twitter jab from the president who had said Governor Cuomo should spend more time doing and less time complaining. Get out there and get the job done. Stop talking. We built you thousands of hospital beds that you didn't need or use, gave large numbers of ventilators that you should have, and helped you. The governor essentially responding, look, how many times do you want me to say thank you? Thank you for your help at the Javits Center and the beds there. Thank you for bringing in this vessel from Norfolk, Virginia, to help out with capacity issues for hospital beds on that. But it got a little bit nastier when he started going into the details of where the two now stand. Governor Cuomo saying if he is sitting home watching TV, this is the president he's talking about, maybe he should get up and go to work. So I think it's fair to say that the olive branch that was passed between the two has just been broken in half for the time being. But they've had a on-again, off-again, productive and at times testy relationship here. But the president, of course, has been chafing at a lot of the criticism he's getting from some of these governors who say he hasn't done enough. The president goes back and said, I did more than enough, gave you more beds, more ventilators than you ever needed. The governor in the case of New York is saying, yeah, but you were following guidelines from the CDC. Those weren't my requests. Those were recommendations coming from the CDC. So this stands to get potentially nastier here. Keep in mind that New York is among, 6 other northeastern states that are delaying their getting out of these stay-at-home provisions for at least another month from now. In other words, not until the middle of May. The president yesterday, in speaking with all 50 state governors, had said it's really up to them after saying that he calls the constitutional shots and the Constitution says that he has the discretion to do that. Backed off from that, essentially saying that now it's up to the states to handle this. But obviously the New York governor chafing at the notion that he has to constantly thank the president for what help he's given, effectively saying, Mr. President, that's your job. Let's get to read on all of this reaction from Doug Collins, the Georgia Republican. The back and forth continues, Congressman. What do you make of that?
Well, I make of it is let's just all do our job. I mean, it's interesting that Governor Cuomo was wanting to cite the president, lecture the president on the Constitution, and that the colonies developed the federal government while also giving over power to the federal government to actually help in this. And what I found sort of amazing in that commentary is at one moment he was talking about how good the states are doing and how they're responding to the federal, but yet on this very second hand, how much they need the federal response, which the president has provided. I think it's the bottom line at the end of the day. It's about people. It's about getting resources where need be. It's about the president had put into action and states have put into action flattening the curve. So you don't need that bed space issues. But one thing that was very disturbing is the constant class bickering that he was going into with big companies and big things that the president was rewarding for it. But yet at the very same time, we're sitting right now in Congress with a paycheck protection program to help these small businesses, in which $6.7 billion has been put into Georgia, 15 million jobs saved, and yet we can't get the Democrats in Congress to come back and just fund that part. He wants money for the states. I don't disagree with him. My state needs money. Other states needs money. But if there's money's already still in the CARES Act for states, and we can come back and fill it, let's fill priorities at the first instead of griping about our own needs first. And that's the only problem that I have with Governor Cuomo is we will take care of the states and the localities, but we also have a portion that has already run out. Why block that money and complain about something that's not run out yet?
All right, so about that extra money you're looking for, Congressman, I guess it amounts to about $250 billion on top of the $360 billion that, as you accurately pointed out, is tapped out right now. It had much more demand and interest than obviously many thought. But it does seem to be sort of hanging in the balance here, and it would require, we're told, folks in Congress to come back to town to deal with it. How likely is that, or do you see this going anywhere?
Well, I was very disturbed when I heard that the Speaker of the House said that we would not come back before May 4th unless it was an emergency. I'm not sure what she classifies as an emergency right now. Small business like payroll is an emergency. Maybe she doesn't believe that these businesses are a national emergency. Maybe she needs to get outside of the San Francisco and other areas to see the businesses that my communities and the communities all over this country who have applied, who need this help, and the ones who got the help are being able to keep people in employment, keep people in jobs, and do what we need to do so that when we come out of this, their businesses can thrive. But you've got many who are still saying, I need some help because the process needs to be expanded. We understood that when we made this. This is a program that was stood up very quickly. Secretary Mnuchin, the president, and others helped get it that way. We've had bumps in the road as we go, but people are getting help. So I would hope that we could figure out a way to do this quicker than that. But right now, the Speaker of the House has said that she just doesn't believe this is an emergency in some ways. That's sort of amazing to me.
You know, this issue has come up before, Congressman, about the governors chafing at the president, up saying he doesn't feel their appreciation very much. Hasn't stopped him from helping them, but he does raise that a great deal, that they're not appreciative. Governor Cuomo said, why don't you just do your job and leave it at that? That's what is required of a president. What did you make of his reaction to that?
I view it as just lashing out. Governor Cuomo's had to deal with a lot in New York. The president has had to deal with a lot. I love how Governor Cuomo talked about the states and the 50 of them. Well, the president is over 50 of them, not just one. And I think they both have those pressures upon them. And I think the president has responded in ways that he was listening to his health resources. It's sort of amazing. When this president listens to his health advisors, the CDC and others, he is immediately thought it was good and then criticized if it doesn't come out the way everybody thought the numbers were. I heard that. But yet, if he didn't respond, it would be the opposite. So I think everybody right now needs to focus. We need to get our businesses back open as quickly and safely as we possibly can. We need to get state, local governments the funding that they need, along with our hospitals, to take care of the people. Certain areas of the country are getting better. Certain areas of the country are just starting to see some more hot spots. We've got to take that into consideration. But when you look at what the president's done, we look at the response, and now we look at what we could continue to do. That's the most important thing. We've got to get this economy back going while at the same time taking care of the health of our people.
Congressman, you've been very, very patient, so I don't have an update on how things are going in Georgia, if you'll forgive me, but I would be curious what you make of the president's plan. It's a three-phase plan that if you think of these states that are delaying implementing anything until at least, May 15th, and I think with each phase of the president's plan, it's a 14-day period before you go from phase one with the initial opening of restaurants and theaters, obviously with spacing provisions and distancing provisions in effect. Then phase two with potentially some schools and other larger places opening up. I think you can see what I'm getting at here, that this could be into June or July until all of those phases are implemented, ideally. Do you worry that the economic return you want to see, obviously people want that too when balancing with the medical issues, do you worry that it is pushing back that economic, that so-called V-shaped return that the president wants to see and a lot of people want to see?
Yeah, there is some concern about that. But the one thing I do believe that the president has always done in this crisis is he's responded to the information as it happens. And that's been a fluid situation. So there has been things that they would first take out. We'd find out we didn't need it. He would switch gears. He would help in different ways. I think the task force that the president is set up will do that. And if this needs to be adjusted, I think due to what the evidence is on the ground, you'll see that. Here in Georgia, I think you'll see the governor here has reacted to more the middle of May. Our schools are shut down for the rest of this school year, looking to get back in the fall. So it will depend on each state and how they're adapting. And even I will have to agree with one thing Governor Cuomo said. Some states have not been affected as others have. They'll be able to open up sooner. And I think the guidelines are just that. They're guidelines. We'll see how they operate and allow the government and the federal government to work together. Congressman,
thank you very, very much. Be well, be safe. Doug Collins, also running for Senate in the state of Georgia. I want to go back to Governor Cuomo because apparently he is not done. Let's dip into
the projections. Blame the CDC, Peter Navarro, and whoever's on the coronavirus task force, because it's their projections.
Can you explain a little bit about why
Peter Navarro I could fire?
Can you explain a little bit why this got under your skin today? You obviously are not pleased with what the president said.
No, it's what he said.
But Cuomo, why this particular criticism? You guys have traded barbs in the past.
But yeah, well, this is an important moment. He's saying he doesn't want to provide funding to the states, and he doesn't want to help on testing. And I can tell you the states can't do it otherwise. And if this testing doesn't work, that's a serious problem. I don't care about his politics, but if we don't have federal help on testing, that's a real problem. And I'm not going to go through the chaos that was created last time on PPE, where people who were genuine heroes couldn't get PPE because there was a lack of coordination and because everything was made in China. We're looking at that situation with testing again. I can tell you that. I know enough to know that. Who didn't ask a question? You have the last one.
What types of businesses do you see being able to open their doors first when we do start to reopen? Restaurants? Would it be hair salons? Maybe eliminate the capacity? What specific types of businesses?
Yeah, we're not there yet. That's what we have to work through. Where, what, and when. Where, what, and when. Thank you, guys. I'm going to work.
All right, you have just witnessed, I mean, we couldn't stay with the whole thing here. We're obviously dancing a lot of other issues as well. But Governor Cuomo, in his testiest response to the president yet, who had blasted the governor for being more interested in talking than doing, and saying that, you know, constantly blaming the federal government was a mistake and all that. I'm just trying to nice up the language here. The governor, in that brief interim, I was talking to the congressman from Georgia, had shown that memo from Peter Navarro, the White House aide, warning back in January that this virus that was detected in China might be a big deal, something we should watch out for, a potential pandemic. We don't know whether it got all the way up to the president. The president had said he didn't remember that. I don't know the latest view in the White House on that, so forgive me. But the governor was pointing out that if you're going to start blaming people and pointing fingers at people, you might as well look at, you know, in your own house about what was sent to you and what advisors like Peter Navarro were telling you some months ago. Now, there's obviously enough blame to go around here. Governors have been faulted as well for not preparing themselves to have enough ventilators, machines, oxygen, you name it, beds, for the possibility of a virus that could extend to the degree this one has. There was no way of predicting that, of course, but there were a lot of warnings going out there. The governor, like several of his counterparts, they're Democrats, by the way, have been saying that this president missed signals too, and going after the World Health Organization. This was not brought up with Governor Cuomo, but a number of the others have said, you're busy pointing fingers at what the World Health Organization knew, but the fact of the matter, you knew a lot of things as well. But this back and forth, probably not productive. The president has said it's up to the states to handle it now, if he's going to give them the power to decide, you know, when to open up for business, you know, then they've got to handle it on their own. Now, the governor and Governor Cuomo more specifically was saying, it's not as if you're giving us any power. We have that power. It's etched in the Constitution. Your interpretation of it earlier in the week, that it was your call, not our call, was wrong. So this is sort of refestered issues that had long been simmering beneath the surface here. But it got to the point where the governor was saying, you know, you ought to quit staying back in the White House watching TV. A real slap at the president. And with his tweet earlier in the day, I'm sure there'll be a tweet response to that. And the back and forth is going on. I don't know if it's productive for either side here, but it is what it is in these heated, polarizing environments that we have constantly escalating. Blake Berman with the latest on this back and forth, because Blake, I have the feeling it is not over.
No. For those of us who have covered President Trump almost 3.5 years in the White House and 1.5 years on the campaign trail before that, Neil, you sort of anticipated that a moment like this might come between the Republican president in the White House and the Democratic governor of New York. You would hope that in the middle of both a pandemic and a recession playing out simultaneously, that the politics would be able to be put on pause, be set to the side, and the issues and what really matters would come to the forefront. And that's the way it had been for many weeks, a month plus between these two. But I think you just saw a potential tipping point, as the president last night had said that it's now in the hands of the governors to make the decisions within their states as to when to reopen. Here's the guidelines. You make the decision. But what we saw from Andrew Cuomo of New York just a little while ago was him saying that they still need the help of the federal government. The governor of New York saying that they need funding. He took extreme issue with the fact that the airlines were given a bailout as he sees it, but yet the states need additional funding. And then he also was worried about the testing. That has been a big component, Neil, that so many have been questioning. How do you return back into society, and how do you return back into business without wide-scale testing? The New York governor saying today that they still need help from the federal government, essentially saying, no, Mr. President, don't sort of back off. We need your involvement here as it relates to testing. So as Cuomo was making that case on television, broadcast all across the country, presumably the president was watching, because this was the tweet. If we have it, if you could put it up in full, the president tweeted, quote, Governor Cuomo should spend more time doing and less time complaining. Get out there and get the job done. Stop talking. We built you thousands of hospital beds that you didn't need or use, gave large numbers of ventilators that you should have had and helped you with. He goes on to say testing that you should be doing. We have given New York far more money, help, and equipment than any other state by far. And these great men and women who did the job never hear you say thanks. Your numbers are not good. Less talk, more action. The reporters there, Neil, where you are, clearly have Twitter and internet, because a lot of that was then relayed to the governor. And he responded by saying, Mr. President, this is your job. You are doing your job. I don't need to say thank you. You're the president of the United States. It was a national emergency that you declared. You're doing your job. We don't have a response yet from the president, Neil. You could probably imagine what it will be like. There is obviously a lot of talk separately as to what political ambitions Andrew Cuomo has. He mentioned at one point that this has nothing to do with politics or any of that. It is a big issue with a whole lot of roads that split off of it. But right now, all of those roads seemingly leading towards what many hoped would not be the case, which is confrontation from the president of the United States and the governor of, if not the largest state, one of the largest states in this country. Neil?
Blake, do you know what the president meant referring to Governor Cuomo, that your numbers are not good? What was he referring to? Poll numbers, the number of cases in New York? Do you know?
It's a good question. I don't know specifically. All we have is the tweet at this point. But I presume that he was talking about the case rate, the death rate, which, as we know, New York has the highest amount of cases, highest amount of deaths right now. So presumably talking about that. In any event, Neil, I think everyone just wants to see a good outcome, whether there's political bickering or not.
Yeah, and you know, people get hot under the collar. This is a high pressure situation. I get that on all sides, but both sides.
Yeah.
But the governor also said it was always up to the states, Mr. President, and I don't need the president of the United States to tell me I'm a governor. Now, was he referring more to the point about the states unable to handle testing on their own, and the president sending out signals? I don't know if he outright said it. You are on your own. You want this testing, you pay for the testing. I don't think he said that, but maybe I missed it.
And I believe at one point he said of the president, quote, he did nothing, meaning that the president, didn't shut down New York, that a lot of the governors have been making their own decision. It's this tricky balance, right, Neil? You've got the governor of New York saying, we need your help. We need testing, we need funding, federal government, Mr. President, do your job. But on the other hand, you also have the governor saying, we're going to go at our speed and make our own decisions. And the president essentially did nothing because we're the ones in control. It's a balance. It is there is so much going on that there's really no umbrella, which is sort of the reason why the federal government has put the guidelines that they have put out and given the states the decisions, the ability to make their own decisions. But you've got this argument on both sides. Should the federal government be helping? Sure. Should the states be making their own decision? Of course. What is the balance between there? You're starting to see it all play out between the president and Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, time for a group hug, I think. But thank you very, very much, my friend. Urban, following these developments here, a quick clarification too from the governor. He kept talking about the more PPE. That's personal protective equipment. You hear this mentioned quite a bit. Acronyms tend to be so tiresome that you begin to wonder what are they talking about. But this is the kind of thing that the federal government was providing, getting that to New York. Governor Cuomo saying, thank you for that, but we need still more when it comes to testing, which doesn't fall into the protective equipment genre here, but it would be part of the things that states like New York are going to need as they weigh getting out of this crisis. New York and at least 6 other states of the Northeast, as you know, have delayed this until at least the middle of May, about a month from now, but the broadsides are continuing back and forth. All of this at a time when we got news out of China today. Forget about the fact that its economy contracted in the first quarter, 6.8%. We've never seen that in the better part of 40 years. But we also had a revised death count in Wuhan. It was ratcheted up 50%. Previously, 2,579 victims. Now 3,869. Apparently, it really was a search of Wuhan hospital data records that brought some clarity to that. So we don't even know whether that is accurate. But Dean Chang of the Heritage Foundation keeps a close eye on all of this stuff. Dean, thank you for your patience with all this breaking news. Do you know whether these latest numbers we're getting from China to clarify the death count in Wuhan are indeed accurate and the latest, most accurate numbers we know?
They're the latest numbers, but I'm not sure that we know whether they're the most accurate numbers. The reality is twofold. One, we're not really sure how the Chinese are counting death figures. If you had a heart condition and coronavirus, are you even now slotted as a heart attack person, not a COVID-19 person? The other thing is that it's very, very hard to believe that in all of China they have had only something like 6,000 deaths, which is I believe the official figures is somewhere in that neighborhood.
So when I look at counts, Dean, you know these counts far better than I, so if you'll just indulge me here. The official cases I get out of China are a little bit north of 82,000. I guess we're showing 83,760 at the very, very least. Now, that compares to a little more than 672,000, I should say, in the U.S. Those figures change as I see them. I apologize. Do you believe there's that kind of a discrepancy between our two countries?
No, I don't. Let's be clear here. The Chinese changed how they were counting coronavirus victims in January. This is something they themselves actually reported. They went from genetic markers to symptoms back to genetic markers, which means that we don't really have a good sense at this point of how they're counting them. Second of all, it is frankly impossible to believe that in a country the size of the United States, with 4 times the population, that the Chinese can state with absolute confidence that there are no cases in the equivalent of northern Maine, the Snake River Valley in Idaho, or on farms outside El Paso. Even with China's social credit score system, it is simply defies belief that they can have that level of monitoring. And this broke out in the middle of Chinese Lunar New Year, when literally hundreds of millions of people are jammed onto Chinese planes, trains, buses, and cars. And yet there were only 83,000 cases in a country 4 times as populous as the United States.
So China lied, if that's right. You're the expert, and I suspect it will be compelled to provide more information in the weeks and months ahead. Do you think it will?
I think everyone is already asking for that data, and the Chinese have been very clearly stiff-arming everyone. They've booted reporters from the Western press, and they've made it very clear that questioning China's numbers is racist.
Dean Chang, Heritage Foundation, you're an encyclopedia, my friend. Thank you for this update. I'd love to have you back to pick your brain again, but the latest update, and I think it spells it up very, very nicely, is these latest revisions that we're getting on the Wuhan province themselves might be still very, very way off the mark here. That 50% jump, a little bit more than 3,000 deaths, might be very, very low. We shall see. By the way, we were waiting for the president to respond to Governor Cuomo. He's tweeted this out a few seconds ago. Cuomo ridiculously wanted 40,000 ventilators. We gave him a small fraction of that number, and it was plenty. State should have had them in stockpile. So this back and forth on who knew what, who did what, you might recall that probably what got the president's dander up is Cuomo to say, I thanked you already, Mr. President. I'm thanking you again, but that is your job. I think that is your job then, which really started back and forth with the president tweeting out to the governor, hearing that he would be criticizing the federal response, that it's the governor is all talk and not doing much. Anyway, this festering tension between the two that has really shown far more cooperation than any division is now on the feisty fighting side here. But again, if you think about it, for governors and certainly for the president of the United States, these are hot and heated times, and heated exchanges are to be expected. Normally, we hear about these are behind the scenes, rarely on open mics and open social media in front of the world to see. All right, so we're following all of that, and if the financial community is worried about any of this tit for tat or back and forth going on, that's a funny way of showing it. The fact that there might be some promising drugs and potential vaccines in the pipeline, and some better than expected news out of Boeing that it's going to resume jetliner production. That's all they really would care about for the time being. Lauren Simonetti has more on that. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, Neil. Well, investors want to hear that the economy can open back up. They want to hear just what Governor Cuomo said earlier, that in the epicenter of New York, the number of hospitalizations is going down. We're not out of the woods, but that's a glimmer of hope. And also, they like what they heard from the president yesterday, that there are phases to eventually reopen the economy, maybe as soon as, well, now or May 1st, depending on where you live.